All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for being on this call. I'm so excited to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Jang. He is a musculoskeletal oncology surgeon in orthopedics. He works at Kaiser in Oakland, California. He has his medical training for both medical school and residency was at Columbia University in New York. He then did a fellowship at University of Florida. Dr. Jang not only is very proficient with all of his research expertise and helps with reviewing at different orthopedic journals, but he also is quite the entrepreneur and has helped with developing new technologies in the field of orthopedics. So we are very lucky to have him speaking with all of us.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that warm introduction, Janae. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, and my screen is visible. Excellent. All right, good. Thank you. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks again, Janae, for setting this up and for the OrthoLink Scholars team for putting this all together. OrthoLink is a really cool thing that I certainly wish I had as a resource growing up. And very much in general, the sort of theme of this talk is really just me talking to myself 15 years ago. And I know many of you on the call are sort of in a similar stage of your journey right now. And I really just kind of want to talk to myself, in back in 2010 when I was first applying to medical school and things like that, and just try to give some advice as to how to succeed over the next little bit. These are my disclosures. This is just my personal views. They don't represent any of the organizations I'm affiliated with. And you guys might be asking, very rightfully so, who is this dude and what gives him the right to say that he's got the secrets to academic success? And I will say, certainly throughout the course of your guys' careers, you'll all interact with people that have will be way more accomplished than I am in terms of academics and every other type of success. And many of you on the call, I'm sure, I'll, see your names, as your careers progress, and you'll far, exceed anything that I do, and I'll look on with pride. But I will say, if there is a contest for most improved player, from the time at which you start applying to medical school and thinking about that process to when you're applying for a job, I will say I'll put myself in the running for that type of award. And so I'm a big collector of quotes, and two quotes that come to mind in preparing this talk was one by Niels Bohr, who, as many of you know, helped discover the structure of atoms. He said an expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. And switching gears a little bit, Malice, who is one of two rappers that makes up the group Clips, had a very actually pretty profound line, I think, in a recent song off their new album, um, which goes, there's an L in every lesson. And so essentially, mistakes and, missteps along the way are something that I've learned a lot from. And I hope to just kind of share those with you, and hopefully, some of these things will resonate and help you in your journey moving forwards. And so just kind of overall the structure of the talk, I'll kind of go in chronological order, honestly, and just talk about matching in orthopedic surgery. And once you match, how to try to set yourself up for success during residency. If you choose to do a fellowship afterwards and do some subspecialty training, I have some pearls. Again, as a result of errors that I've made in the process, and then ultimately a little bit about searching for your first job and just general advice at the beginning of your career. So in terms of the first step here, matching in orthopedics, three of the lessons that I learned during this process, during this time in my life, was to use imposter syndrome to your advantage. Don't let the haters bring you down, and that people matter most. And I'll go into more detail about what I mean about those things. So number one, using imposter syndrome to your advantage. This was the house that I grew up in as a kid in Queens, New York. This house, actually, the landlord split it up into 6 units, and so we shared this home together with five other families. We had less than 900 square feet, and had an amazing childhood and really happy for it. But certainly, when you grow up like this, there's many points along the way in which doubts creep in. Like, can I really be a doctor? I didn't know any doctors. I didn't meet an orthopedic surgeon until I was 23 years old. Can I be an orthopedic surgeon? Can I match in a really competitive subspecialty? All these doubts start creeping in. But ultimately, this is a big source of strength for me every step of the way. when I started to doubt myself, you kind of think about how far you come, and it's really something that can be a source of strength. A little bit of my journey. I graduated college in 2009. Decided kind of late to apply to medical school, and I did so in 2010 and got rejected from every single one, not even like a wait list or anything. And so, I could have easily just been really sad and do something else, but I kind of decided, hey, this is still something that I really want. And so I tried again in 2011. And, my dream school was Columbia. And I can tell you with confidence, I was literally the last person that snuck in there. It was 13 days before classes started, before I made it in off the wait list. And that was after much, pestering of the admissions office. And then ultimately they relented. And then, fast forward 4 years, I ended up being the president of my class and got to give an address at graduation. And so, came a long way certainly. And it was mostly persistence and, just kind of, hard work and, dumb luck, honestly, that got me there. Um, and honestly, every barrier thrown at you along the way in this journey that you guys will go on is an opportunity to prove your strength. Being an orthopedic surgeon is certainly hard, and then becoming an orthopedic surgeon is very hard as well. And in many ways, I think it's intentionally designed to be that way. There's really no need at all in my life to know what the Krebs cycle is, right? Like none of that is really useful. But being able to select out people that are willing to put in hard work, put in those hours studying, sleepless nights, all that kind of stuff. All those are signs of a person that will do well in this field because it is certainly challenging. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, because many points along the way, you're going to say, why is this a thing that I have to do, right? But it's all kind of there for a reason. Every chip that you can potentially have on your shoulder, and I'm sure everyone on this call can think of, one or two things about themselves where it kind of gives you that deep burning desire to prove people wrong, and to say that you can, do all these things that you want to do, and really kind of use that to your advantage. And for me personally, especially when I interview folks that are applying for our orthopedic residency, grit is really like the X factor that I'm looking for. Is this the kind of person that, hour 28, and you've been running around throwing traction pins on all night, you got no sleep, you're hungry. Are you the person that's going to make a good decision, when it's, hour 28, or are you going to, make bad decisions or get angry at nurses and, we'll have to apologize after the resident afterwards, because of interpersonal conflicts, or can you kind of handle it? And I think many people are in the same boat as me where, that's kind of one of those intangibles that you want to demonstrate. So, again, I'm sure people of all kinds of backgrounds and life experiences here, but really draw on those as sources of strength more than anything. Don't let the haters bring you down. These are all direct quotes from people that have been in my life throughout this process. I had the program director at the time when I was a medical student, told me it'd be a waste of time to do a sub IHSS since you have zero chance. Proved him wrong. I was ranked to match there. Same thing with joint disease. He said it's a reach for you. Don't even apply. I was ranked number one there when I applied. And then another person said, I would throw your CV in the garbage if I was the program director interviewing you, which was a very, graphic and delightful thing to hear. And then even when residency started, that didn't stop. I remember during one case as an intern, I accidentally broke a little K-wire off. And then he proceeds to take it out with the heavy needle driver and throw it at me because it had some weight on it to actually try to hurt me. And then he says, "You bleep, you belong in a medicine residency." So all of these comments, of course, hurt at the time. But looking back on it, especially the last one, that was actually kind of creative. That was sort of funny. But you can kind of look back on it and laugh. And so, again, both in terms of, necessary barriers and like unnecessary, hate from the doubters out there, you will run into this kind of stuff throughout your journey, guaranteed. But those are all just bumps in the road, and you have to push past them. And finally, in terms of matching an ortho, one lesson that I learned is that people matter the most. It doesn't matter, ultimately, what school you went to or how many letters you have after your name or, any of that kind of stuff, or like what your MCAT score was. The further along you get in this career, more and more the people matter most. When I look through applications for residency, the first thing I look at is letters and what people who are in your team and on your board of directors, as it were, what are they saying about you? Because you can immediately tell if someone is, someone that, an applicant has made a really positive impression on people. So don't be afraid to ask for advice. And this is, obviously all of you guys are on this call and you're already well, on your way to being in that mindset of trying to gather as much advice and information as possible along the way, and keeping in touch with the people who supported you as well. Make them glad that they helped you out, and then give them updates about, all the cool things that you've been up to, and all your accomplishments. I will throw up the pictures of three people that kind of made up some of that team early on. This guy here on the left, his name is Philip Kim. He is, I think, a general surgeon now in Vermont. He and I basically interacted for maybe 12 hours one night. He went to the same college as I did. I think we maybe talked once or twice, but one day he emailed me and asked if he could crash on my couch in preparation for a med school interview. And this was actually right after I got rejected from every single medical school the first time around. And so talking with him, gave me some great advice about how to, like, massage my GPA, how to, like, report certain things, how to go about, seeking shadowing opportunities and researching all that stuff. And for him, he probably doesn't even remember this interaction. And but it made a huge difference for me, where I had a paradigm shift. Instead of this being something I have to figure out on my own and, like, grit it out and bear it. The fact that I didn't know any doctors, I wasn't pre-med, all that stuff, meant that I really had to rely on people, more than most. And that really changed my mind about things. And that's perhaps the biggest difference in how things went the second time around. This person in the middle with the sick mustache, this is Dr. Melvin Rosenwasser. He is a hand surgeon and trauma surgeon at Columbia. And he is someone that I owe a huge debt of gratitude to. He took a flyer on me when I applied to be a research assistant, again, 15 years ago, when I had nothing on my CV. And he, supported me in so many ways along my journey. It took me on mission trips. I got to meet my whole family. We still send each other Christmas cards. Really phenomenal person. And the thing is, in the operating room, he's extremely scary. He's like very old school, barks at you, yells at you all the time. But he was a really good lesson in the fact that as you go through your training, the people that ride you the most, the people that are hard on you, those are often the people to gravitate to. They're the ones that care about you and your development more so than the really chill person where all you do is kind of talk about fantasy football and it's a good time, but they don't really take the time to make you better. So don't shy away from people that are a little bit scary, because oftentimes they're the ones that are most invested in you. And for those of you that have been in my operating room, I think there's a couple of you out there. You could definitely feel that part of my personality come out once in a while, but it's all in love. And then the yin to that yang is Dr. Wakenda Tyler over here on the right. She was my tumor mentor who started at Columbia like late in my third year. And she is the sweetest person on earth. I think frick is the worst curse I've ever heard her say. And she's an incredible human being, great teacher, just lovely person. Obviously, changed my career trajectory and made me want to go into tumor. And she was also a great reminder that, you know, people of all walks of life make it into orthopedic surgery, and not only that, become stellar leaders in the field. Right? She, like, child of a single mom, West Philadelphia. But there's all kinds of people in orthopedic surgery that make it and are successful, and she's definitely a walking reminder of that as well. Shifting gears a little bit, actually, let me open up to questions. Anyone have any questions about kind of medical school, getting ready to try to apply to residency, things like that?
A question that someone had asked previously was, what are some of the common mistakes or red flags that you see on an application as someone who's reviewing applications for residency?
Um, yeah, I think that's a really good question in terms of red flags. So I think in many ways, for me personally, at least, I can't speak to other people and what their opinions are. But what I really want to see is people that know what they're getting into, if that makes sense. To me personally, it's honestly a little bit worrisome if someone's like pre-med all the way. Maybe they're a child of a doctor, and of course not everyone's like this. Janae Rasmussen obviously is like a case in point of someone who has a parent who's a physician, but is one of the most creative, inspired, energetic people that I've ever met in my life. But for someone maybe that is coming from a different field also and doesn't have a lot of shadowing experience, or like doesn't have a lot of kind of experience around medicine, and their essays kind of read as such. That's a little bit, scary as to someone that might get into it and then all of a sudden realize like medicine isn't necessarily what they want to do. And so, people throw around shadowing as like a thing that's good to do, and for sure it is. But I do think sort of like demonstrating that you know what's involved, especially if you're wanting to get into orthopedics, knowing that it's a tough road, is something that's helpful. Um, Honestly, when it comes to interviews, like just interpersonal relationships is the biggest thing. Again, people matter most. And if you get letters from, I don't know, like someone that you work with at a gas station when you're in high school, but then that letter is just like talking about what an incredible person you are and a hard worker and someone easy to get along with. That to me, that type of letter to me is worth its weight in gold compared to where, it's obvious that, you got some letter from some famous name, but they have like no idea who you are. So again, obviously it's a very competitive field to get into orthopedic surgery, and so there are things like you have to have certain test scores for sure, etc. But really the most intangible things I think are your essays and your letters, giving me a sort of an insight into the kind of person that would do well in residency. And then the red flag conversely are people that don't seem to have those qualities.
Do you have a question you want to ask, Christopher?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Rasmussen, Dr. Yang. So, in terms of applying to orthopedic residency, I'm sure you've seen a lot of applications. In terms of, do you ever notice when residents are applying to, let's say, ortho, and can you kind of tell that they're also shooting for like another specialty? And if you can, what's your opinion on that? Or do you want to see somebody that's only gunning for ortho, or are you okay kind of seeing some variations?
That's a good question. Obviously, that's a move that a lot of people do. Ortho being competitive, you kind of want to hedge your bets, and a lot of times, apply in another specialty. Um, uh, so I think that that is totally legitimate and fine. That being said, you don't want to make it extremely obvious that you're doing so, right? Like your letter should be, 100%. I want to be an orthopedic surgeon, etc. And in many ways, there shouldn't be much that kind of reveals that hand, as it were. I mean, certainly, I think it's perfectly fine to do so, and it just makes it a little bit more complicated. You got to make sure you keep your story straight. Send the right letters to the right place programs and the right essays and all that kind of stuff. But when you're there, when you're submitting your application, when you're at the interviews, I wouldn't even like think about it. Just be in that mode where like, hey, it's ortho or bust, and kind of have those interactions with that mindset is what I recommend.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Is it Kavya?
Yes, hello. My name is Kavya. I'm a second year at PCM Georgia, and I just had a question as someone going along my path and trying to figure out what I'm interested in. Orthopedic surgery is definitely something I've gravitated towards. I got the experience of shadowing a few great orthopedic surgeons here, and of course, with whoever I shadow, I'm like, wow, that's an awesome field. And I haven't had experience in the OR, and right now I'm just trying to figure out how much do I actually like surgery, and I'm not really sure how to approach that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly tough. Being in the operating room is a big part of orthopedic surgery, obviously, and a big differentiator from other, musculoskeletal type specialties like, physical medicine and rehabilitation, sports medicine, whether it be through, family medicine or through emergency medicine, etc. So there's definitely lots of different ways in which you can kind of work on musculoskeletal health, right? But the operating room definitely is a big differentiator, both in terms of like what you do every single day and also the duration of your training and your work-life balance. So definitely encourage you to find any way that you can to get into the OR. I know that not every hospital, lets you do that, and you might be limited to the clinic or something, right? But when there's a will, there's a way, right? Like, I know this is being recorded, but I have a high school student that's going to be shadowing me soon, and like technically, I'm not supposed to bring her to the OR, but I'll just bring her in on a weekend and do it when there's not a lot of people around, right? So again, when there's a will, there's a way, and I would certainly encourage you to jump straight in and like really try to immerse yourself. The
Mhm.
people that I see burn out of orthopedic surgery or quit residency are the ones that maybe don't have the best appreciation of what it's going to be like, right? Like, because ortho is cool in theory, I think, to most people, but it's a long road, honestly, right? It's a lot of difficult years of training. It's physically demanding, and there's, all sorts of hierarchical, dynamics and things like that along the way sometimes. And so you really want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And two pieces of advice I give primarily to people that are trying to decide on a subspecialty within ortho, but the same applies to you as well. The two pieces of advice that I give are: number one, think about the beginning and the middle and the end of your career. I see many people making the mistake of only seeing people towards the end of their career in terms of their mentors. And they think, oh, wow, being like a late stage, spine surgeon is great. Like you book 100% of the patients you see and like it's amazing. But it's guaranteed it's not going to be like that early on, right? And then same thing with like, if you want to pick a specialty or subspecialty, you better make sure that you like the most glamorous thing that they do, but you also have to be okay with the least glamorous thing that they do, right? Like if you want to be a hand surgeon, you have to be okay with hand infections, right? If you want to be a spine surgeon, yes, it's cool to do, incredible scoli corrections, but you got to deal with axial back pain as well, right? So you kind of have to be okay with the whole spectrum of what your career might entail.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And
And
to that end, I was actually thinking about anesthesia for a while. I did a couple anesthesia sub-Is, but it sounds really silly, but I really hate oral secretions, and I hate listening to other people's music. And so it's like those little annoyances are what made me ultimately go into surgery. So it could be minor things, right? But you never know. You want to, this could be like 30 to 50 years of your life, right? You got to make sure that you really, like everything about it.
I don't want
and
to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if I could ask one more question too, but if it's okay otherwise.
No, by all means.
Um, Also, I guess this is kind of a pivot, but in terms like everyone says you need research, and I know it's an important thing in terms of a CV. And you also hear about these cases where you have a candidate that has so much research under their belt, and like as a medical student right now, I'm like, how is that feasible? Um, would you have any recommendations on how to get into that mindset, or just like what the best path for finding research is?
Wow, that's a perfect segue into the next section of my talk. Thank you. All right, well done. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of building your CV during residency as well as before. The same applies. But yeah, in terms of research, it is a bit of a game. Again, similar to the Krebs cycle, like not everyone's going to go into academic medicine. And so you might think like, what is the point of doing research, right? If like I, have no interest in doing it at all later on. And to some extent, I'm in a practice now where, of course, I interact with residents and do some research, but it's not nearly as big of a part of my practice as if I were at an academic center. But again, it's again just another demonstration of the fact that you can multitask, you can have sort of a scholar sort of mindset, continuously develop your skills, get stuff done and get stuff done in the long term, and just kind of move the needle forward, right? So again, even if you don't end up being a research machine academician, it is a good muscle to flex to know how to get things done, in your spare time, when you have other demands on your time, right? And then be able to build coalitions, be able to build teams to accomplish things that you want to, right? Even in private practice, right? You might, end up being the head of a committee that helps, change things in the operating room, right? Or improve quality. And it's the same kind of muscles that you have to, flex during those activities as you do during research. And so it is a bit of a numbers game, but it is a winnable game. And what will say is like research, sometimes when you start, you have this idealistic view of it's going to be like earth-changing stuff. It's going to be super interesting. But in reality, it's going to be a lot of slogging through stuff that you don't find that interesting, but sometimes you just got to do it, right? And again, it's not the most glamorous thing. It may not be the most enjoyable, but it does serve a purpose. Again, it tells people that you're someone who can, manage multiple things, manage your time, and get stuff done despite, hardships. In some ways, quantity is more important than quality nowadays. Of course, you want to have impactful research, right? So you want to try to have grants to your name by the time you, apply to fellowship and things like that, and especially, papers that are PubMed indexed. That kind of is a marker of higher quality research. But everything counts, just every little line on your CV is helpful. And for better or for worse, it's a bit of a intellectual shortcut. But it does happen in residency interviews where someone's like, oh, well, this girl has like 25 papers. And like, yes, they might all be garbage, but people do kind of put some stock into that, right? Like, there is something to be said for, it's just being able to push stuff across the finish line and just getting things done as sort of a proxy for someone that can do a lot of good things during residency and beyond. Everything counts, all those little projects. But I do encourage everyone to keep those like one or two projects that you really care about, keep them close to your heart, keep them going, keep sort of building that flame, to make sure that you don't get too jaded and you do, make sure from time to time that you're working on something that you feel really passionate about. I definitely recommend having a bit of a tiered approach to that end. So essentially just having like dream projects that you love. You might, shoot for the moon and try to ultimately submit to like a really, top tier journal like JBJS or JAOS. And a disclosure, I'm an editor for JAOS, so I'm going to talk about it like it's really awesome. And then, these things can take 3 or 4 years, maybe even more. My most recent paper that was published in JBJS last year, but I started as a third year resident, so PGY3, and I'm like a PGY 11 now, I think. And so it can take some time, but those are again the things that like will keep you going because they're fun and they're things you care about. You do want a sort of second tier, like solid studies that might take you like a year or so, from start to finish. Those are things you can definitely talk about with some passion and energy at interviews. Might not be the pie in the sky thing, but they're definitely, solid things that you want to draw attention to. And then you just got to kind of fill it in with some low hanging fruit, retrospective studies, review articles, that might be relatively quick to bang out. But you want to really have a constant supply of these and then make it a team effort is my recommendation. On these sort of like lower tier things, it might be like case reports or series. Nowadays, a lot of them might be sort of open access, meaning you have to either pay or get someone on the team, like when you're attending to kind of pay a fee to get them published. But that sort of is reality sometimes nowadays. And a good way, especially during residency, to kind of have a steady, stream of like decent research, is to do things like review articles. The JAOS in particular, they do have a max of 2 per year, but they have a nice thing whereby you actually submit outlines first. And so if there's a topic and you look it up and there's no one's talked about, I don't know, like ACL revisions in like a few years, you can try to do a review article on that. You just submit a quick outline with some references. And if they accept you, as long as you do a halfway decent job on the paper is going to be accepted. And so it's kind of nice because then, you have almost a guaranteed thing without spending like a whole bunch of time and effort on a paper, only to have it rejected. And like, then you got to do that painful process of shopping it around ultimately, right? So it's a relatively sure thing that you can keep going with. And of course, things like textbook chapters, online textbooks, videos, etc. Those are not the sexiest thing in the world, but those are all things that count, right? They all just go on the CV regardless. Some of you may be in the same situation I was during the first half of my residency, where I had no tumor person for the first three-ish years of my residency. And so I had nothing to really work with clinically. And so even in that scenario, you can still get research done. You can, look at other subspecialties, even other fields of medicine. Um, People don't care so much about you having all the best research in, pediatric deformity spine surgery. If you have tons of papers in like cardiology, that still tells people that you're able to do this kind of stuff, right? So I wouldn't really, perseverate on, having it be in like the exact right specialty. You could even use public data. During this time when I had a dearth of data to work with, I published studies using like stats for like pro athletes that are available online, information from like physician conflicts of interest on the Sunshine Act, fellowship program websites, something called the fragility analysis, which lets you analyze pre-existing papers. And this might be the silliest paper I've ever published, but just using math, I had an attending wonder how much the cup antiversion seems to change if someone's off on the C arm. And so I just Googled some math and made an illustration, and this became a paper, right? So you don't necessarily have to be at like the world's craziest academic center with like tons of resources to get research done. Again, when there's a will, there's a way. You can get research done no matter where you're at. And be a student of kind of the different types of research, right? You have kind of a hierarchy whereby you can have like really, high quality randomized controlled trials, but this takes time and effort and energy. I'm doing a clinical trial right now, and it's been like 2 years in the works, and it's a ton of time and a lot of effort, right? But again, just case series, case reports down here, or expert opinion, things like that. Those are relatively easy to do, and you kind of want to have a hand in all these pots, as it were. Organization is super key, to your point, Kavya, and starting early is really key too. Um, the mistake that I see many residents making is that they know they have a research rotation during third year or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, God, I can't wait to get through the first couple years of residency so I could start my research during my research rotation." If you do that, you're already host. Even if you had the ability to stay up 24/7 and work for 3 months at a time, there's really not much you can do research wise, right? Because grants take time, IRBs take time, manuscripts reviews, take months and months sometimes, revisions, etc. And so a quote I like to attribute to myself is that the calendar matters more than the clock. You really have to just be at it early and just kind of keep chipping away at things and keep at things and stay organized in the process in order to have, one of those killer CVs that you're talking about, where there's so many things on there. It doesn't happen overnight. It's been a long time in the works for those kinds of people, and they had to be super organized and just be really on top of things. To that end, this was a screenshot of my sort of like research project list when I was a third year resident. Um, Again, probably there's only about maybe 40% hit rate of any of these studies going anywhere and becoming published. But that being said, you just kind of, safety in numbers, you got to just have your hand in a lot of things. Right. And again, working as a team is really important. I try to gather as many like sub-Is and first year med students as possible to help out with things. Have a big team of co-residents, work with lots of different attendings, even like joints or foot and ankle people, and just really stay on top of things and make sure you're, again, putting in those days in the calendar of like, oh, I got to make sure I don't miss this deadline for, the IRB or for a grant or whatever. Like, you really have to get good at this in order to, again, have those really kind of impressive seats. Really be collaborative. Again, people matter most. You want to engage your co-residents, med students, like literally anybody. And OrthoLink again is incredible because you might not be in a situation where you have access to like 1,000 residents and med students, but OrthoLink kind of lets you accomplish the same sort of objective as well. And of course, like the major journals have limits on the number of authors, but you can always test those limits. And even if you don't make the cut in your acknowledgement, who cares? Like that's on your CV, and people probably don't read it closely enough to be like, oh, it's 3 of these 10 things are acknowledgements. Like who cares? And you want to think about the skills that you bring to the table. I was mechanical engineering as an undergrad, and so one thing I knew I could do well is make drawings and CAD, diagrams and stuff. And so I've been on many papers, just making drawings and stuff like that, right? And if you have a team of people and one person's great at stats or one person's great at writing grants, maybe one of your buddies knows cost effectiveness analysis or machine learning, you can quickly sort of like be really powerful. And a lot of the papers on my CV, myself and a co-resident or whoever, we just came up with a methodology that seems to work well. And then we just did the same kind of study in trauma, and then the same kind of study in foot and ankle, same kind of study in sports, right? So it's a really multiplicative effect where if you get kind of a good cadre of people that can work together, through whatever means that you have available to you, then you can really sort of get the momentum going. You got to play the game a little bit. There's a saying within medicine that in medicine, money is not everything, it's the only thing. And ultimately, when you start applying for academic jobs, to be a little bit cynical about it, like research is valuable because you can bring in grant money. And so one thing that's really impressive on applications, for when you start applying for jobs and stuff like that, especially if you're going for an academic job, if you have grants to your name, that's something that's really important. And actually later on, when I talk about the actual mechanics of writing a CV, this is something that you really want to highlight as well. And so many of you may know the OREF is a grant that's available to residents. They have many levels, but there's like a $5,000 grant and a few others. It's actually not terribly hard to apply for one of these, and you can apply for one a year, so might as well just apply every single year, even as an intern. And there's also, of course, grants from subspecialty societies, internal grants from your universities or program, et cetera. And also don't sleep on industry. All three of the papers that I got published in JBJS, I had a question about, anatomy, and I couldn't find anyone in my program or adjacent to my program that had like a big database of images. And so I asked Stryker, like, hey, you guys have the ROSA, you have a bunch of like CT images. Can I come up with a proposal to do research with you? And so they said, sure. And then ultimately they even like, flew me out to New Jersey to like work with our engineers and do this kind of stuff. One thing you'll see, guys, if you stick within orthopedics is that uh, industry is a bit of uh, a presence in the field, like it or not, right? And so you might as well take advantage of it. They know that if like med students and residents, think Stryker's cool, maybe that changes their bottom line later on, right? So don't be afraid to kind of like, make up your own sort of ways of getting grants, as it were, through these kinds of means. Again, apply early and often. A lot of people again make that mistake where they're like, hey, my first 2 years I'm just going to slide through, I'll think about research later. But if you start third year and you're trying to apply like beginning of fourth year, that's not much time at all. So just go for it. First year you might feel like you've never done research before, but you never start learning how to do it until you try. And even if you fail, right, even if you don't get the grant, you get some good feedback, you learn how to do it better next time. So really just early and often. In terms of the actual mechanics of the CV, try to keep it current continuously. As I was waiting for y'all to log on, I just decided might as well pull it up, and there's some talks that I forgot about that I threw on there, things like that. It's easy to forget the little things, especially during residency. The days are long, but the years are short. Every day you're trying to just survive and get home, and you kind of might forget to add things like when you lecture to your co-residents, or courses that you go to, or grand rounds that you give, or random acknowledgements. And so just if you make it a habit to open it every few weeks or so and throw stuff on there, it's a lot easier to keep track of all that. The program director that said they would throw my CV in the garbage was kind of right. And when I look at CVs for residency applications, bear in mind that we might be looking at like 100 of these a day. And if you come across one with like lots of flowers and like, cool fonts and like it's all right justified and like all like cool looking, it's a little bit annoying in some ways, right? Because you gotta sort of adjust your brain. And so you want to really keep it simple. Like your options are Times New Roman and Arial, and that's kind of it essentially. There is a certain grammar as to the order of things and what they should be called and stuff. And so I learned a lot just by Googling like, hey, here's some doctor in my field and CV. And then a lot of times I'll publish CVs of people, associated with a meeting or whatever, right? A lot of times that's sort of a requirement for CME and things like that, actually. So this is kind of how what helped shape my CV. This is my CV from when I applied to fellowship. So this is at the beginning of my fourth year. So I'll kind of share it with you and go over some kind of tips and stuff. Again, in terms of order, you start with your basic demographics, your postdoctoral training education. Again, I was still a resident, so I didn't really have a license at that time, but that kind of goes on there eventually. And I'm sure we'll kind of share these slides at some point as well. Then you go with your honors and awards, right? And you sort of go in chronological order and throw that in there. And then professional societies and committees. Some people will call it service to professional organizations. But again, this is showing that you're someone who can not only handle, medical school residency, at a bare minimum, but also be someone who's, trying to up their game, get involved, be a leader, that sort of thing. Then again, as I mentioned, in medicine, ultimately money isn't, everything. It's the only thing. And so you want to lead off with your grants if you have any. That's sort of like the first like real business item that you throw in there. And then you start going into your papers. A couple of little hints, it's nice to highlight your PMIDs, meaning like basically the code associated with papers that are PubMed indexed. And that way it's a little kind of subconscious reminder that, these are legit papers. And a nice little tip is to also use numbering instead of bullets. And that way people can at a glance, look at, how many you got, which again, it's kind of stupid that like that's something that people care about, but some people do care about it. So you kind of want to number those. It's also okay to include accepted articles or manuscripts in process. And ultimately, these are all talking points for interviews, right? And so even if you haven't got a lot of papers to your name, it's totally fine to even be like, research interest, right? And have like a pretty detailed, description of like a project that's, even just kind of percolating in your brain. And as long as you're able to talk intelligently about it and passionately, that could be like the best thing you put on there, right? If that kind of piques the interest of someone at an interview. And I found this happened a lot with kind of socioeconomic ideas that I had in terms of like social determinants of health and things like that. Those are the kind of things where like those papers are sometimes hard to accomplish in a short period of time. But that inspired a lot of conversations with people. So, I would definitely encourage you guys to do that. Then you can talk about presentations. You can kind of choose your own adventure in terms of how to structure it. And you want to basically like choose whatever lets you flex the most. Because there's many ways of skinning the cat in terms of how to divide it up. You can make it national and international versus local, or first author versus co-authored, or whether or not you're the presenter. And you can kind of like structure it how you wish. But that's sort of the next thing after papers, is to talk about your presentations. And then ultimately you start getting into like the tier 3 like textbooks, chapters, videos, etc. I would make sure again to keep track of any didactic courses or continuing education or professional development activities, even like leadership courses, things like that, seminars, etc. Again, it's showing initiative that you want to learn new skills and up your game. You're not someone that's just a passenger along for the ride. So those are important things to throw on there as well. Professional experience, like work experience, etc. Any sort of teaching you do, including lectures or grand rounds, you even just give to your own department. Those are all things that, again, especially if you're going to academics, you want someone that's comfortable talking in front of an audience. And this is a demonstration of that. Again, keep updating it as you go. It's really easy to forget these. And one thing that I didn't know you can do, and I kind of regret not doing it, is keeping track of who the audience was and how big it was. I'm helping interview someone for another department actually soon, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I lectured to UCSF, whatever surgical committee, is an audience of like 200 or whatever." It's like, oh man, that was smart. I should have done that. Then kind of volunteer leadership activity, etc. And what I will say is, the further along you get in your career, you want to, in the beginning, I think if you're applying to, let's say, medical school, you want to put a lot of interests and, volunteer activities and languages and, hobbies and things like that in there. Because again, you're just trying to initiate some common conversation. I will say, as you get further along in life, this section kind of gets whittled down a little bit, and that's okay. Any questions about kind of CV building, research during medical school residency before we move on to fellowship applications?
Kavya, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hopefully I'm not taking anyone else's time, but I'm just wondering, after seeing the kind of the volunteerism and what is that, leadership section, um as a student, I'm pretty involved in leadership communities and stuff like that. And in terms of like publication, it kind of got my wheels turning on terms of how I wanted to ask, how creative can you be? Um, I'm an illustrator, so I have illustrations published in books, or and I like health advocacy, so I've had resolutions to conferences. Is that something that's of interest?
I would say 1,000%. Anything that sets you apart, anything that kind of piques people's interest, and also anything that if someone asked you about it, I could tell you're just gonna light up and really kind of come alive when people ask you about it. So 100% throw it in there. I've seen Janae's CV, and she can definitely speak to there's no like rule set as to like it can only be within the confines of orthopedic surgery. Anything that you find passionate. And I did the same thing. I have like random like astronomy textbooks that I threw illustrations into. I threw that on there as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Arif?
Yes, it is. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yes, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got muted. Dr. Jang, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. My name is Arib Ahmad. I'm a first year at UCF in Orlando, med student. I just had a quick question. This is like a little like small, but let's say you are working on a research project and you present that to two different international conferences. Are they two separate bullet points on your CV, or do you just do one bullet point and kind of signify where like you presented that at?
Yeah, it's probably in your best interest to separate it out. I think most people do that anyways in real life, and of course, it makes it, look a little beefier. We got more lines on it, so I think that's totally legitimate.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Mhm. All right, excellent. So if no more questions, just kind of applying to fellowship. Again, people matter most. Again, the further along you get in your career, it's so much less about, your test scores and things like that, and more who's going to bat for you. And so, the more people you can ask about fellowships, the more information you will have. This is not the kind of thing where, like, to some extent, ortho residencies, right? You can kind of Google or OrthoGate or Reddit or whatever and find some stuff out about residencies. But with fellowships, you're so far into the weeds that, like, you just kind of have to ask real people in order to get the information that you need, right? And so, reach out to people that you know through residency or med school. Even if they're not even in that field, they might, be close friends with someone kind of in your field of interest, etc. Just talking to people at meetings, really a big part of the benefit of getting presentations accepted into meetings, that you get to just like go and hang out and, like, just kind of rub elbows with people and hear how people talk, kind of learn the lingo, get to meet people, etc. And again, industry and reps, that's kind of a little bit of the dark side of orthopedics, but you can use it to your advantage. I know I actually got in touch with a lot of fellows and young attendings when I was applying it for tumor fellowships, like through reps, right? Because I'd be like, hey, do you know anyone at like whatever Vanderbilt? And they'd be like, oh yeah, this is my boy. Let me get you his phone number, right? And so, like, that's totally a good way to get in touch with people to try to get more information to help you out. Obviously, forums and websites. On an earlier version of this talk from like several years ago, I had OrthoGate because back then that was like the only thing. But it seems like OrthoLink is another really good resource in terms of like connecting with people at various stages of their careers as well. And even the ACGME website. I have a bit of a bias because I used to work for the ACGME, but it has a ton of public-facing data, including like for individual fellowships, like what their case logs are and stuff like that, and what programs are in trouble, right? You can actually look up as a random layperson, which programs are on probation or on warning or, that kind of stuff. So that's a nice little additional bit of data to help you with your decision making there. There's a saying that fellowship is just a year, which is good and bad. It's kind of a mixed bag. Um, Things that matter less than you think in retrospect are things like geography and weather, whether or not there's a cool gym or like if parking's free or what your salary is. To me, the single most important thing about fellowship is, or just training in general, is who is now a part of your team afterwards. That long-term mentorship. Like, I know any of my fellowship mentors, I can text them right now and wake them up and say, hey, I have this really tough case. What do you want? What do you think? And they would be happy to help me out. And that is the biggest difference. Service versus education, that's something to think about as well. I was in a very blue collar residency where, you're working 100, 120 hours a week, doing crazy things. And once I shifted to a fellowship where it was like pretty gentlemanly, like 40, 50 hours a week, that gave me, whatever, an extra 30, 40 hours a week to like focus on absorbing everything, writing notes, um, you know, gathering every bit of information I could in terms of like, little things like what instruments to throw on my trays, like little techniques, etc., and actually get in the habit of reading things with some regularity. And so, obviously, it's important to kind of be busy clinically and help out the team, etc. But it is something to keep in the back of your mind. Is this an experience where I'm going to be able to really absorb a lot of stuff, or am I going to be running around, reducing stuff in the ED all day long as well? Geography can be a little tricky as well. My main point of reference is tumor, where it's a much smaller world, but kind of depending on how large your subspecialty is, you might want to be strategic about where you apply. In general, it's fairly hard to get a job in the exact same city as your fellowship because people are a little hesitant to train their competition. They might be similar dynamics. Whereas if you're like the city over in a suburb, that might be ideal because everyone knows, for example, like who John Healy is at Sloan Kettering. And so anyone that wants a tumor job in like the tri-state area, you're like basically gold if you go to MSK, for instance. And so, this is very different based on your subspecialties, but something to think about as well in terms of where you choose to go. And in some ways, there's a lot of benefits in terms of, I went from New York to Florida to California, and really going somewhere totally different with a different patient population and different kind of initial Godfather thoughts that permeate the thought process behind the training. It was really helpful actually to get like multiple different kind of opinions on how to do things before starting out. In terms of your interview, some common questions, of course, many of these are self-explanatory. You want to really have some good answers at the ready. And some of the more out there questions that I got that caught me off guard a little bit would be, what are your top 3 research interests, right? Everyone has like the one that they have at the ready, but sometimes it's, if you go, they'd be like, hey, what's another one and another one? And it becomes really easy to tell who's doing research because someone told them to do it versus someone who has real intellectual curiosity. Someone asked me point blank, can you operate? Which is kind of an interesting question to answer. I think I said something like, I like to think so. And, if I had that moment back, I'd have come up with a way more clever thing. But yeah, just kind of, and this will naturally happen as you see the same people on the interview trail and you hang out at the bar afterwards. But just really kind of think about, having good answers for these questions. One of my favorite ones was, what will you accomplish in your career that will make me proud of you? That's a very sort of profound question that I got from actually University of Florida, where I ended up going. One thing I will say, one red flag, one thing to avoid is I used to like just on behalf of other people, just like cringe so much when someone, comes to a fellowship interview and like, maybe someone's aging, right? You're kind of wondering, are they going to be there in a year and a half, et cetera? And they'd be like, hey, when do you think you're going to retire? And then you see like the micro expression of like, oh God, this question again, right? Or like, do you anticipate any changes, et cetera? I mean, those are important things to know, but you can kind of do it in a tactful way. And so try to avoid the temptation of asking that. Maybe ask like the fellows that are there, that kind of thing. Some good questions to ask are that, the chair of my residency program, he tells me to this day when he advises sub-Is, he tells the story of when I was a sub-I interviewing. And the one question that I asked was, when was the last time a resident made a lasting change in the way that this program is run? That signaled to him that I was someone that wasn't going to be a passenger. I wasn't good. I was wanted to leave the place better than I found it. And so he still uses that example to this day. And you might want to come up with a question, that's similar or gets at, some of your own personal strengths. But in a lot of interview rooms, you're moving quickly. You only have a chance to ask questions. So you want that to make an impression, right? And another one I asked during fellowship was that, is there a project that you really love that you wish a fellow could be there for more than 1 year and really help you see it through, right? Because fellows come through for a year, half the year just kind of getting, your feet wet and then getting settled. And so I asked this at my fellowship interview, and the answer was, a couple of inventions that they came up with, like a finger bovie and a soft tissue resection device. And so be prepared to follow through if you ask something like this. But I helped them out with it, even before I started, and I continued to help them out with these things, even whatever 4 or 5 years later. But yeah, just kind of think about this for a minute before, med school or residency or fellowship interviews. Again, what's that one silver bullet question that's gonna sort of really demonstrate to them what kind of person I am and what sets me apart. Ask program specific questions. It's obvious when you ask the same one to everybody. And when you talk to fellows, just really think about, asking them what qualities they think are necessary to thrive and who they're going to call for advice when they have tough cases. The answers to these questions can be really revealing. And really keep detailed notes, especially as you get on to like, I only had to do 7 interviews because tumor, there's not that many fellowships. Many of you might need to go on like whatever 30, 40 fellowships if your subspecialties are larger, right? And so it's going to be really hard to keep them straight. And so I kept this massive, Google Doc of like questions I had ahead of time, and pros and cons and things like that after the interview. And I just like word vomit on the airplane or whatever. Just to like make sure it's all there. I would even actually pre-write out handwritten thank you notes for everybody, including references to stuff that we talked about. And then ultimately, what you're looking for is that email, saying that they want you to join them. And so really, again, same kind of muscle that you have to build up for research purposes. Same thing applies for any sort of interview process as well. This is really important. Post interview, it might not be possible for all of you to do this because again, tumor is very unique in that there's not that many fellowships. But even for your top 4 or 5, I would actually really advise you to get contact info for the current fellows and get in touch with them about a couple of months after the interview. It's really, really revealing what they say when they're not under the limelight, when they're not sitting next to their attending at dinner, when they're towards the end of their fellowship and maybe they're really tired, they're going to be really, really honest. And my rank list almost changed completely upside down based upon this single step here. And I am very glad that I did this. I heard some fellows say that they wouldn't choose this program again. They don't feel ready to start practice, or that they're just really miserable and they just know that something, fellowship is something to get through, right? Whereas, like, at the University of Florida, people were like, am really sad to leave. Like, I learned so much. It was an incredible time. I called, these guys by their first names now, and it's really been an incredible experience. And that sort of honesty you won't necessarily get at an interview. So definitely recommend that you do this. When you ultimately make your list, and this applies to, I guess not med school because it's not a match, but for residency and for fellowship, you want to be really honest and make it in terms of the order of what you want. Not what you think your parents would be happy with, or even your spouse or your mentors. Make it really what you want. There was a guy in my year applying to tumor fellowships, and there was a program that was a big name, but was clearly on the downswing. He ranked at number 1, assuming that he wouldn't match there. And of course, he matched there because other people saw the red flags. And so he was very, very miserable for a year. So make it truly what you want. And again, that imposter syndrome is going to sneak in there and be like, oh, I can't even, like, why even like waste it on X? But you never know, right? It's, you don't see yourself necessarily how other people see you. And you definitely don't want to play games. I would still recommend that you tell your number 1 choice that they're your number 1. I hate that this is a thing that you kind of have to do. But again, every other person that's competing for that spot, there's a good chance many of them are doing this, right? And so I do think that's still something that most people are better off doing, but don't, play games or lead anybody else on. And I have maybe 3 or 4 more slides about job search and earlier career stuff. Anyone have any questions at this point about, applications, interviews of any sort? All right, seeing none, I'll finish the last couple slides here. In academics in particular, if you see a really good job posting on a website, unfortunately, it's already been filled. This is a game that a lot of places play, whereby to meet Title IX requirements and DIE requirements, they'll basically already kind of interview the people that they want to interview, essentially promise a job to somebody, and for like 30 seconds put it up just to say that they put it up. And so again, people are really important. You want to keep in touch with anybody and everybody. The way that I got my job now actually was like through like a random person that was attending at Columbia for a little bit and then moved to Stanford. And I was literally just like, hey, what's happening out there for tumor jobs? And again, it was a job that ultimately only got posted after it got filled, right? And so it's kind of something where you want to leave no stone unturned at this point. And use all the resources you have in terms of your mentors, again, even industry reps. When I was a fellow, I actually found out that they asked the Stryker and Zimmer and Synthes reps here to reach out to their counterparts at my fellowship and be like, what is this person really like in the operating room? How are their hands? How are they in terms of their interaction with other people? And so, it kind of goes both ways, right? You can also use them to help kind of hear about jobs that are out there because they obviously have their ears close to the ground. Same thing in terms of alums from your fellowship and then your fellowship mentors themselves, random meetings, whatever anything and everything. When it comes to like looking for that job and negotiating contracts, if it's not in writing, it does not exist. I know so many people that were promised, oh, when you get here after a year or 2, you'll get X, Y, and Z, and it never happens. And especially for private practice, I would definitely hire a lawyer, even if it's like some whatever legal Zoom thing. This might be one of the most important contracts you sign in your life. And I can tell you many, many stories about people that have had predatory things happen to them. And so would highly recommend doing that. Last couple of slides here again, just general questions. All these are pretty straightforward in terms of your block time, new patients, who's going to be helping you out. Specifically for academics, you want to ask about the advancement pathway, or more accurately, do your research in this. There's a couple of great jobs I was looking at where, there's like a log jam of like 4 people ahead of me, for becoming chair or whatever. Or, other places where like there's a history of like anytime a chair changes, like 80% of the department gets fired or leaves, right? And so that's not sort of something I wanted to be a part of. You kind of want to see like the lineup of who's an associate or full professor at these places. And if you're looking at the lineup of people and there's like nobody that looks like you who's a full professor, that might be a little bit of a red flag as well, in terms of like the type of environment that you're in. Whether or not you get dedicated academic time, especially, I mean, if you have played the game right and you've built up a really good CV with grants and lots of publications and stuff like that, you know, supposedly some of your value in this proposition is as someone who can, be really productive research wise. And it's hard to do that without time. And so now is the time to cash in those chips and kind of ask about that. And lastly, in terms of new patient referrals, this can be something that makes you very happy or very unhappy in your job, especially in academics. None of the referrals coming in are going to be directed to you because you're nobody, right? They're going to be directed to, the super famous person who's been there forever. And so even just people's reactions to when you ask about how new patients are divided up, that'll be really illuminating in terms of kind of what the culture will be like and how your job satisfaction will be, especially early on. Last couple of things, just like little random bits of financial advice. Don't forget about public service loan forgiveness. Even if your first employer or second employer is not on the list, they actually get added to the list all the time, and that list changes. So there's obviously some changes to public service loan forgiveness, both positive and negative, happening in recent years, but something to remember. For the love of God, everyone open a Roth IRA and try to contribute. The way it works, for those of you who don't know, it's a retirement account where things are taxed on the way in, but they can grow tax-free forever, and then you take them out and there's no taxes, right? And so you're hopefully never going to be in a lower tax bracket ever again. So now's the time to take advantage of that, throw stuff in there. My wife and I recently bought a house, and when they were looking through our credit report, there was a Roth IRA my wife forgot about. She's, contributed like 6 grand, whatever, 15 years ago, and forgot about it. And it became 120 grand in the intervening time, for literally doing nothing, right? So please, any leftovers, skip whatever DoorDash that one day and just like throw whatever in there. I guarantee you'll be happy you did. And when you negotiate a contract, especially for an academic or HMO kind of job, there's not much you can negotiate. But one-time expenses are a lot easier to ask for, right? So moving allowance, signing bonus, or start date, it's way easier to justify, whatever, giving you 10 grand once instead of like negotiating a change in your base salary. Really just kind of, last things here. Remember, you don't have a lot of time. And so you want to really just sort of think about, getting your money to work for you and protect yourself. As a physician, you'll have lots of liabilities. So when you ultimately, buy a house, put it in a trust. I'll have life insurance. When you get disability insurance, make sure it's own occupation, which means that you are basically covered in case you cannot be a surgeon anymore. If your disability insurance is not own occupation, even if like both your hands get chopped off, they can make you work as a peer-to-peer reviewer because you still have a doctor's brain, right? And you can like, talk to people on the phone. So you want to make sure that own occupation is there because that protects your ability to be a surgeon. Last little random piece of advice to store in your brain. Everyone has a gap between fellowship and your first job, or between your residency and your first job. Spend like $50 on LegalZoom and start an LLC. You'll thank me one day. It's a nice way to protect, any side hustles or, assets from your employer and from, other liabilities as well. So that was kind of a lot of stuff, just brain dump of like stuff I wish I knew 15 years ago. Hopefully it's helpful to some of you. Here's my email. Please take it down. And again, I think one of my takeaways is that, the people that matters more than, what you know, or where you come from. And so feel free to add me to your team, throw me, emails with any questions or concerns you may have, now or anytime in the future. Thank you again for this opportunity. This has been really fun.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I wanted to throw in about the disability insurance. As a medical student, you should absolutely look into that prior to residency. I was under the false assumption that once I started residency, I would have disability insurance set up for me. That was not the case. And because I went from Arizona to California, where the disability insurance was way more costly, it ended up being something that would have been way more intelligent to have done that earlier, particularly in certain states where it's a lot cheaper. So something to look into, and just be mindful that there are a lot of companies out there that are going to say they have great disability insurance. But as Dr. Jang was saying, oftentimes it's actually not good coverage. So that's something to just be very mindful of. I'm happy to share information on where I got my disability insurance if that can help other people as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Jang, for taking the time. I hope everyone here learned a lot, and just Dr. Jang was someone who stood out to me on my tumor rotation because not only is he just a kind person, but he really cares about health literacy, social determinants of health, and also being an amazing surgeon. And I was just constantly blown away by all the things he was doing with his entrepreneurial skills and with research. And I wanted to highlight as well that, as he mentioned, he wasn't brought up into understanding how to do research. He really took the initiative to do that. And for those of you that are on these OrthoLink Scholars projects, I hope all of you continue to do that. The whole point of this is to help provide a network and to provide a resource so that you can learn those skills. So many of you have published your first orthopedic related publication, and it's so exciting to see that and to see the initiative that a lot of you have taken, because we all got to start from somewhere. When I started residency, I had one orthopedic related publication. Now I'm over 30. And that didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of work and a lot of personal sacrifice. So I hope for all of you that might feel discouraged or not sure where to start, like Dr. Jang said, the best time to start is now, and really maximize those networking opportunities. You never know who might know someone and who can go to bat for you and help get you a position. So I hope all of you learned a lot, and thank you so much again, Dr. Jang, for taking the time. I cannot speak even more about how much I admire you and appreciate you helping support these wonderful students and residents on this call. Does anyone else have any other questions before we close off for the evening? All right, well, oh, go for it, Christopher.
Yes, thank you. So this is outside of kind of anything we talked about. But I noticed you on your CV that you had a family and some children. That's a beautiful thing. That's something that I want personally myself. What's kind of maybe some advice you'd give to students that want to start a family and do this? I know there's no one answer, but I would love to, and I would appreciate hearing that.
That's a really great question. A lot of times you have to put your life on hold for your training. And my male privilege, my wife, spent a lot of years working before I started residency, so she's actually had the privilege of being able to take time off for the kids. And so we actually had our first daughter was born 36 hours before intern year started. And so we were like, here's a newborn, see you later, see you never. So God bless her, she like did the lion's share of the work early on for sure. And then we had our second child, our son, basically just as the research rotation of my third year was starting. And then of course, right after he was born, I got appendicitis on my like last day before research started, and so I was like useless for a period of time too. And so, just being blessed with an incredible partner that certainly helps. And like Janae said, it's personal sacrifices. And again, I'm extremely privileged. I know many people don't even have the choice, right? And like are unable to even think about having a family during residency for many reasons, right? And so it would be I was extremely fortunate to able to, not delay that part of my life experience. And we had healthy kids, and for all that, we're really blessed. But again, it's honestly, in some ways, it was like a really unique and interesting challenge of like, how little sleep can one get, with the newborn on top of being a resident. And it was certainly challenging. But again, it's one of those things where like, if you just had the attitude that all these hardships are thrown at you so it can come out stronger on the other end, then I think, you can kind of grit your teeth and get through anything. And, of course, now we have an 8 and 10-year-old now, and, it's incredible and really fun, and now so much more time to be able to spend with them. But a lot of that is due to, like Dr. Rasmussen said, the work early on, getting that flywheel started and going and getting that momentum so that I can, have a lot more freedom and autonomy to pick where I go for fellowship and get a good job where there's more work-life balance now. And I can kind of reap the rewards and spend more time with them at this point. So all I can say is good luck. It's definitely not easy. The one thing I wish someone told me actually before having a kid was that babies have zero redeeming qualities for like 6 months. I felt bad that, well, I was like, why is this so horrible? But it's horrible for everybody. So if you go in with low expectations, you'll be fine.
Thank you. That is a blessing for real.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And the program that Dr. Jang helps as an attending is the St. Mary's program associated with UCSF, and then also with my program based in Modesto, California. So for those of you that are applying to either of those programs when you get there, you might end up meeting Dr. Jang. He doesn't help with our Modesto interviews currently, but at least with the St. Mary's. So just wonderful opportunity if you end up matching at one of those two programs because you'll get to work with him.
Thank you for the kind words, Janae. And I'm happy to help out with interviews if you guys want me to.
I was going to say, I think at least next year, my chief year, I'm going to have to make that happen. That'd be wonderful.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm happy to drive out there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time, and also for all of you who are currently on projects. I know how hard it can be trying to balance all of your obligations, and it truly, a lot of you, it stands out the amount of work that you're doing and the effort and the learning. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.